Hi, I'm Laura Rolfe, the host of Powered by Franchising, and I'm thrilled to invite a special friend, James Ullman with the Ullman Law Group, to join me today to talk all about franchising, the legal aspects of franchising, his experience working with franchisors as well as franchisees over the years. Jim is definitely one of the top leading attorneys in the United States, specializing in franchise and intellectual property, and he brings a common sense approach to everything he does. So welcome today, Jim.
Thanks so much, Laura.
I'm glad to have you here. You've been a lawyer for a long time now. Tell me how you got started in franchising.
Well, I think franchising found me. I didn't find franchising. What happened is I was an in-house attorney for a transportation company based here in Phoenix. And my boss, the CEO, said, I really want to franchise sales territories, both domestically and internationally. And I said, okay. And so I knew nothing about franchising. So we engaged a franchise development company out of the Bay Area. And even though the chief consultant was a non-lawyer, I learned so much from Dennis with that engagement. And I grew to love it because it's entrepreneurial. The people you deal with are upbeat getting into it. They're independent, yet they, really want to have a system to guide them in some sense. And that was the start of my career in franchising quite a few years ago.
Well, I love franchising because people are in business for themselves, but not by themselves. And it's a path to business ownership to become an entrepreneur. So as you said, people are enthusiastic, excited about investing in themselves and in the future. So I see that enthusiasm when you first started in that transportation business that was franchised nationally.
Right, absolutely. And when the company sold a few years later, I went out into private practice, and my practice now is pretty much limited to franchising, both representing franchisors and franchisees, and also branding, trademark clearance and prosecution and things like that. So I deal with people that are, excited to hopefully launch something or, fine-tune something that they already have that they believe can, be duplicated in a profitable vein for others. So it's just a fun area, and I've been doing it for a long time.
Well, just like Dennis showed you the world of franchising, and he wasn't an attorney, but he educated you about franchising, I think it's important to surround yourselves with franchise experts, whether you're franchising a business that you own or looking at franchising as a potential franchisee. You got to talk to an expert, and that includes a franchise attorney rather than the family attorney or the divorce law attorney. Would you agree?
Absolutely. If you're looking to have an investment in a franchise, there are a couple of reasons that are just so they seem self-evident, really. First of all, the contract and the documents you get, as you know, Laura, hundreds of pages. I used to say when we get paid by the pound in representing franchisors. And also from the franchisee side, you're going to be in a system with somebody that you didn't know before then for a period of probably no less than 5 and possibly 20 years. You'd think and making a significant investment, you'd think you'd want to have somebody, read through it, help you out, answer questions. And when I represent franchisees, and I do that often, it's primarily educational. This is what the contract says. This is what you're going to be living with. These contracts, it's no surprise, are written by very sophisticated franchise lawyers. There are very few franchise lawyers in America, and they're candidly one-sided. So you really need to have somebody guide you through the process, I think.
It is a legal binding contract, and they can be overwhelming. I've seen franchise disclosure documents that are several hundreds of pages long, and so I always like to chat with my candidates before they even receive a copy of that franchise disclosure document, so they're not overwhelmed and they get stuck, frightened by all of this massive education about a franchise system. And there's a couple of areas that I highlight in the franchise disclosure document, or FDD as it often is referenced. What are some areas that you recommend that people initially, before they even get to you to review the document, that they pay attention to?
Sure. But the first thing that they really should be doing is making sure before they hire a lawyer that this is the concept that they want. They probably should have done some due diligence, which we'll talk about in a second, and probably gone to a discovery day and feel real comfortable. So once that's there, the key is really talking to franchisees, both those that are currently in the system and those that have left. Those names, addresses, and telephone numbers are required by federal law to be in the document. It's pretty easy to reach out, and in my experience talking to franchisees, they're very willing to talk to prospects, so it's a real missed opportunity, and I encourage every franchise client of mine to do that. In terms of the actual document themselves, I'll take the lead from what the regulators. We meet with the regulators every October. There's a big legal convention. And it's actually going to be in Phoenix this year. It rotates around the country.
Very cool.
And they say that they look at these documents in the registration states, the states where, as you know, but maybe our audience doesn't, there are some states where you can't offer or sell a franchise without the state approving it. California is the closest and most obvious. And these regulators from around say, look at item 20, look at those charts in item 20. They really do tell you the kind of the health of the franchise system, because there's a 3-year look back, and you'll see how many franchises have been sold, how many have been sold, opened, transferred, terminated, and the like. So you get a lot of information from that. Secondly, the item 19, the famous item 19, which is voluntary, but most franchises are now coming up with some sort of what's called an FPR, financial performance representation. That's how much can I make? And there aren't a lot of guidelines to it, so franchisors have a lot of liberty here. The only thing they have to do is be honest about it and not misleading, but they can give gross profit, net profit. They can basically work the numbers as long as they're accurate, as they wish, and they can include their numbers for company stores owned by the franchisor or an affiliate, as long as they make the disclosures that those stores aren't going to be paying royalties. And of course, the most meaningful are franchisee results when they get them. So those are the two critical things. The third, I would say, is look carefully at the financial documents. The financial statements have to be audited at least in the second year for registration states right from the get-go in the first year. So that tells you a whole lot. And then probably, obviously, all the fee stuff in items 6 and 7.
Yes. The ones that I tend to point out initially are items 7, which gives you the initial investment. Not every dollar that is invested in your business goes to the franchisor. A lot of it are startup costs of simple things like training or registering your business, any marketing. So itemized list of where your initial dollars are going to go is important. And then also understanding in that item 7, are they capturing the first 3 months in business, and what are the extra, I call them rainy day funds, in item 7. And then your royalties and marketing and technology fees that go along in item 6, I think are really important.
Right. Those are very important, and because whether you're going to take your 401k and invest or get an SBA loan or whatever, you got to know, what your outlay is. And as you pointed out, you also need a little bit of working capital for a rainy day because not every business at all is profitable from day one. So
Right.
those are the key areas. I agree.
Well, and I think some of the reasons that franchisees fail is they're not well capitalized from the get-go. So making sure and vetting those numbers that are in item 7, your initial investment costs, when you're talking with current franchisees, are these an accurate description? I work with emerging as well as veteran long-term franchisors, and sometimes the emerging brands may skimp a little bit on real estate costs or marketing costs initially. So that's why a franchise attorney to review those, they might be a little light in this area, is important.
Just last week, I did a review with a client, and I said to that candidate, I just question these numbers. You've got to go back there and just double check. And then on occasion, I have seen a disclosure saying these are estimates, it could run higher. And I don't really think that's fair. I think that the law says you have a high and a low range, and I think you should, make the high range the top and not have any unexpected expenses.
Right, exactly. Well, and franchising is all about following systems as well. So understanding the systems and what you're agreeing to in the franchise agreement is another reason why a franchise attorney is so important, because sometimes people are like, well, I like this basic structure of the franchise, but I might want to do it my way. So talking with a franchise attorney, you understand what the franchise way is.
Exactly. It's very interesting that that point, because you have to follow their system, or that can lead to some jeopardy for you. And I know one very successful QSR franchise that the line never ceases to end for their product, and they really don't want people, of high net worth. They want people that are really going to work it themselves, work their system, and not have a lot of independent thoughts because, hey, their system works.
Yes, well, there's some national brands that we're all very familiar with that you're not going to serve, filet mignon at a burger joint, as an example. So you got to follow what the system is.
Right.
And your customers and other franchisees expect you to do the same. So another area that I like to discuss with my candidates is you wouldn't want another franchisee down the street that you border the same territory, and they're offering something different than you are, because then that confuses your customer.
Right, exactly. And by the way, you did mention territory. And territory, it's probably not the top 3 or 4, but I spent a lot of time on both sides of the coin representing franchisors and franchisees, figuring out what's fair to both of them. There's a term of art that you're well aware of, but our viewers may not be, and we call it cannibalization. And that's when there are too many, too close. Sometimes it works, but very often it doesn't.
Yeah, I think most franchise systems have independent territories, but there are some models that have shared territory, or the corporate office can also sell services in a franchisee's territory. So understanding that before you sign the agreement, it's always better to have a good understanding ahead of time.
That's one of the most important things that I point out to franchisee clients of mine. It's called reservation of rights. And it basically says you can have your zip codes or your 2 or 3 mile radius that's protected, but we can go in there as the franchisor and compete against you. We just can't use the brand that we're selling to you. So, and that's very standard now. Over the last 10, 15 years, I'd be hard pressed to say that I've not seen that language in a franchise agreement in America.
Now, franchisors don't like franchise attorneys coming in there and redlining a whole franchise agreement. But I see that if your family attorney is taking a look at it, What advice would you have for our viewers who are having somebody look at a franchise agreement? Do you do a lot of redlining or make recommendations?
Great question. Almost exclusively, franchisor and their lawyers will not permit redlining to the document. What they might permit, based upon their size and the investment of the potential franchisee, is to highlight certain points that go into an addendum, and the addendum then modifies those sections. And I work on those day in and day not out, but you got to pick and choose and go for the ones that you really think are critical to your client and will be accepted by the franchisor. But they'll never permit redlining to the actual core document itself. I wouldn't permit it in the franchisor's clients I represent, and I don't ask it when I'm on the other side representing franchisees. And as you can well imagine, trying to get a negotiation out of a worldwide brand is much more difficult than a startup or kind of somewhat new or nascent franchisor. And also, if the franchisor sees it, you're a benefit to the system not only in the number of franchises that you might acquire, but also your knowledge or expertise. You're probably in those instances perhaps be able to get some of the things, provisions that you want to get changed.
Now you bring up a good point. There's a lot of veteran brands, long standard nationwide or internationally known brands, and then there's lots of emerging brands too. Everybody started as an emerging brand. Everybody starts with that first location. What advice would you have for our viewers who are looking at an emerging brand with less than 20 locations?
I would just say be very careful and take a look at the franchise financial statements very carefully. Some of these registration states that I've mentioned will not permit the franchisor to take your money until you've been trained and opened. That's called a deferral. We don't have those laws in Arizona, and nor are those laws in roughly 35 to 40 other states. So the majority of franchises sold don't have a state monitoring those kind of things. So you want to make sure the new franchisor understands the system. It'd be very important to find out if they have their own company locations or not, and how long they've actually been in the core business or something very related to it. Essentially getting a good feeling from the franchisees that have already opened. What'd you think of the training? Were they there to hold my hand, etc.?
You also work with franchisors and help current businesses franchise their business. Give me an example of somebody you've helped and what that process might look like.
Well, I'm proud to say I've done a fair amount of work, not only representing franchisors, but private equity is pretty involved in the franchise space, and I've represented some Wall Street institutions that own, buy, and sell franchises, because most of them keep them for 3, 5, 7 years and then resell them. So I do a fair amount of mergers and acquisition work in the franchise space. But the one that comes to mind, that because I started from day one, is Massage Envy, that is based in Scottsdale, but I took them through their first sale of a franchise through about 8 years, and 900 units sold in that period of time throughout the nation. And it was so much fun to see, that growth, explosive growth, because the franchisor really cared about their franchises, and they had a really good model, and the timing was right.
Well, and we share that connection with Massage Envy. When I was with the Arthritis Foundation, we did Healing Hands for Arthritis, when they were, I think, about 500 units, and they grew to over 1,100 units over the course of the 4 years we did Healing Hands for Arthritis. So living in Phoenix, I also had the pleasure of working with Massage Envy and also the local franchisees and franchise developers. So
we
what
should-
a thing to hang your hat on.
Right. Exactly.
You've been in franchising for a long time. I'm sure you've seen lots of changes in the franchising really isn't an industry, but in the world of franchising. What are some of the most significant changes you've seen?
Well, from the legal standpoint, we used to call it a Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, and now it's an FDD, and there are some changes when that occurred roughly 15 years ago. But by and large, you're seeing a lot more franchises in the service industry, gearing toward medical or paramedical, gearing toward senior living, health care. These are very, very complex franchises to write up and review because there are a lot of laws that are health-related laws that you can't run afoul of as either a franchisor or a franchisee. But yet we see quite a bit of that, and I review and have some clients that are in those spaces. So I see an explosion of service-based franchising over the last 10 years. That's not to exclude products and QSR, but that's just been dynamic growth in that space.
What areas do you see franchisees doing, or franchisors doing really, really well that you wish you saw like emerging brands also replicating in their success?
I think franchisors do well when they come up with a product or service that is hopefully recession-proof, that it's not a one-pony show, that they've thought about the future and how the service or product can evolve to evolving needs. That's a big concern in some franchises that have something normally in the service area that really looks terrific, but perhaps technology changes or a change in a law, such as in the healthcare area, could really blow the franchise out of the water. So it's real important to have franchisors that realize that they have to evolve. And having said that, it's a good segue to indicate that oftentimes some of the best ideas for new products and services come from franchisees, not from the franchisor. And probably one of the best speeches I've ever heard, and God knows I've been to franchise meetings over my career, was from the president and CEO of Dairy Queen. And Dairy Queen was having its druthers many years ago when a franchisee came up with the mix-in blizzard that really saved the system at that time. That's just one example. There are countless.
I love a good blizzard.
Right. As long as you don't have to shovel it.
Yes, exactly. We don't have to shovel sunshine here in Arizona. You are part of the national group of franchise attorneys that meets pretty regularly, once a year. I think you said the next meeting is in Phoenix in October. What is your role on the national stage in franchising?
Well, I had, I've certainly been involved here in Arizona. To start out with, we did have the first state franchise association. It was called the Arizona Franchisors and Licensors Association. And I was very active in that. I've spoken nationally for quite a few franchise conferences and seminars. Was active at the International Franchise Association. Their lawyers have a law conference. The American Bar Association has a wonderful legal conference. That's the one you were referring to in October, every October. And it's fun because it goes different places so we got to have a good time, and have a break in the evening and get to see our colleagues once a year, sort of like same time next year. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I've been hearing a lot of talk, which stem from the International Franchise Association's meeting here in Phoenix in February, that was held in Phoenix, about responsible franchising. What does responsible franchising mean to you, Jim?
Well, I think responsible franchising means a commitment to the system and to the franchisees in the system, and perhaps a code of conduct that really tries to create a partnership, a symbiotic relationship. Because if the balance is too skewed to the franchisor, taking the royalties off the top, that's not going to last all that long. It's not a healthy system. And the franchisees also have to realize that they have made a commitment to a system. And oftentimes, the 7-year itch that we all know about is a 3-year itch in franchising. Hey, you've trained me, I know everything or whatever. Why am I paying these royalties for the next 10 years or something? I can do this, I can do that. Well, no, excuse me, the franchisor was good to you, got you into a new milieu, a new business, and you signed this agreement, and it's time to, stick with it and continue on the relationship. If you want to renew or don't want to renew, that's up to you, but you've got that commitment. So you have to have that kind of balance on both ends.
Agreed. And royalties, I have my own take on the benefits of royalties to pay to the franchisor. What are the benefits from your perspective of royalties paid to a franchisor?
Well, quite simply, that's how they make their money. I have heard repeatedly, and you probably have greater experience than I do, that you can't count as a franchisor on the initial franchise fee being your only revenue stream, because there are costs of sale, brokers, accountants, lawyers, and the like that eat up a lot of that, and so the franchisor's bread and butter is the royalty. That's ongoing, and that promotes the strength of the system. So without it, it wouldn't exist. And whether it's a flat fee or a percentage of royalties, some systems have to have a flat fee because percentages don't work. Particularly in the healthcare franchises, you see that a lot.
Well, and back to the symbiotic relationship, it is a symbiotic one where I feel the franchisor is invested in the franchisee. So when you do have percentages, the success of the franchisee translates into more royalties to the franchisor, and the ability for them to have staff that can continue to coach, mentor, and train you as a franchisee, as well as any of your employees, and continue to get better as a franchise system.
Absolutely.
So what are you most excited about the future of franchising?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because, to be honest with you, even though I've been doing this a long time, 80 to 90% of the time that somebody calls me for a review, I don't know the franchisor or the system. So I'm learning. I always like to say I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. I've learned so much about so many businesses, and I love that. But obviously, I don't get into the weeds of the business. I get into the weeds of the document, and it's really hard to predict because there's so many clever people out there that are entrepreneurial that see something and gravitate to it. The only thing I would say is, if I put my franchisor hat on, you got to take whatever you have to license because a franchise is a form of a license. You have to take that and be able to train somebody to duplicate that system probably within a period of 2 weeks. If it's too complicated or too complex, it may not work for either end, either the franchisor or the franchisee.
So are there businesses that shouldn't be franchising?
Oh, yes. Undoubtedly. Yeah.
Yes. So is there anything else, any other stories or fun things that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I could share a war story. God knows I've had plenty of them. But when I represent franchisors, new franchisors, and I'm doing all their documents, putting those pounds of paper together, I always train the franchisor on the legal and regulatory aspects of franchise sales before I bless them and send them off to the world to sell their product or service. And I always tell a story because it really sort of highlights the importance of the FDD, and I'll share it with you briefly. This is quite a few years ago. A gentleman came in to see me, and he was very unhappy with his franchise. He had bought multiple units. He had made a lot of money as an oil company consultant in the Mideast, retired to Arizona, bought multiple units of a service business, and was losing money very rapidly after only opening up the first or second, and he had an obligation to open up several more. And I said to him, well, let me see your disclosure document. And he said, I didn't get one. And I said, oh, I think you did get one. You may just not remember. No, I didn't get one. So I said, all right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send a letter to the franchisor who was based back east, and I'll ask for the disclosure document. Candidly, Laura, I didn't like this guy all that much in the initial meeting, and I really was going to show him the receipt for the disclosure document and tell him, good luck, I'm sorry this didn't work for you, but you did receive the document. So unannounced, he shows up at my office about 10 days later and says, did you hear anything from the franchisor? Of course, I was doing other things, and he didn't have an appointment, so that was kind of, put me off a little bit. But I said, well, let's just see if I can get a hold of him. So I dial into the office, and lo and behold, I get the president. And the president of the franchisor says, oh, I got your message, and he got the document, we got the receipt, I don't know what he's talking about. And by the way, don't call my lawyer because he'll charge me gazillions of dollars an hour. Just tell him, to go back and try to make his system work. And I knew the lawyer very well. He was one of the top franchise lawyers at the time, and I have no doubt he was expensive, and I didn't call him. And so I started to develop the case because I got a little put off by the franchisor. This case required arbitration, not litigation. And frankly, over the period of the next several months, I actually got to like the client, too, as we put the case together. And we went into the arbitration. And Laura, what do you think Exhibit 1 to the arbitration was? The receipt.
Yes.
Right? But we had developed at that point a pretty significant case based upon the misrepresentation of their salesperson in terms of the real estate aspects of it and other aspects. And we basically got him what's called rescission, all of his money back. And as you can imagine, there were about 4 or 5 other franchisees that ended up parading into my office looking to get out of their franchise system. So the key here is, from the franchisor perspective, never move further without a receipt being signed from the franchisee perspective. Read it because, it really contains everything that you should need to know to make an informed decision other than, doing a little bit of the due diligence we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that candidates will receive a copy of the franchise disclosure document, and they do have to sign the receipt that they received it, not that they agree with everything in it initially, and then they have to sit with it for at least 14 days
Right.
before they can purchase a franchise, and usually it takes much longer to do your due diligence and evaluate a franchise system. But where you come in is, so the candidate has received their document, 2 weeks have passed, they've done their due diligence, then you do need to review the FDD in its entirety before you sign. So I think that's important that in this case,
Right.
the FDD was not, it wasn't fully disclosing what was important.
Right, exactly. That was the gist of the case.
So as far as you represent franchisors locally as well as nationally, and we have about 2,000 active franchises in the U.S. currently selling franchises. About 300 new franchises come into the system to sell their franchises every year, and about the same amount exit the franchise sales every year. What do you have to say about, 2,000? That's a lot to choose from.
It sure is. That's why we need you guys as franchise consultants to really help out and lead the way and really try to focus on the strengths of your candidate and what their passions may be. We're the wrong people in the legal profession to do that. Those colleagues of mine that practice in franchise law know what they're doing, but we cede that over to you. And I was unaware of those numbers. I knew the numbers that I had heard were kind of dated, but they were more along the lines of something like 65% of all retail sales in America are from franchise units. I can't swear to that,
Right.
but it's significant. It's more
It
than
is.
50%. And Arizona, parenthetically, is one of the top 2 or 3 franchise markets in the nation.
Right.
Yeah.
So as far as next steps go, with somebody looking at a franchise, it's I think coming full circle, it's important to have a team around you to fully evaluate. So let's say you're looking at you want a franchise, whether you want to supplement your income or leave a W-2 job and invest in a franchise. You may have an idea of what you're interested in. So talking to a franchise consultant can help guide you on what brands to evaluate and look at. You're going to look at a franchise disclosure document. You're going to talk with the franchisor and current franchisees of a system. But a very important integral part of your team is also the franchise attorney.
Well, I'd like to think so for the reasons we discussed. I mean, I would never get into a franchise without having somebody with the knowledge, tell me what I'm getting into and see if I can, get the best advantageous deal if there's any kind of room to negotiate.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having you on the show this week, Jim. We are going to share this with our listeners on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn, and you can also find us on Star Worldwide Network's page. We're going to tune in next week and have a local entrepreneur who is also an advisor and a consultant. So thank you again for joining Powered by Franchising.
Oh, delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.